Hello Brandon, welcome to another episode of In Brandon. My name is Randi Curry. I'm joined here today with three folks from the city. I have Jackie, Ryan, and Patrick. I'm going to let them introduce themselves as they have very complex titles and they are very important titles. And I want that to make sure it's correct. So Jackie, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I'm Jackie East. I'm the General Manager of Development Services for the city.
And I'm Ryan Nicol. I'm the Chief Planner with the city.
And I'm Patrick Pulak. I'm the Director of Water Resources and Engineering Services.
Perfect. Really, it was just Patrick's I was worried about. We are here today to talk about Brandon. We're talking about the fact that Brandon's conversation rather right now is that everybody would like to see Brandon grow, more or less, correct? So
Right.
that's the conversation that's going on. Now, one of the issues with Brandon growing, if this were to happen, is that it's going to cost money. And as taxpayers, all of us in this room, we want to know how that's going to happen. So we're going to start with the how, because there's a lot of ins and outs to this topic, and I want to make sure that it's covered correctly so that everybody is well informed of what's going on.
Okay.
So
Sure,
take it away with Jackie.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I'm going to back up and just talk about Brandon growing, or no, I'm not going to talk about Brandon growing, but I'm going to ask Ryan if he'll just talk about, well, why do we think Brandon is growing or needs to grow, and what does that look like in the city's plan?
Yeah, for sure. So Brandon is a growing city. I think people who live in Brandon know for a while we were about 40,000 people, and we kind of stayed that way for a significant amount of time. Over the last 10 years or so, we've grown by almost 10,000 people. So the last census comes in at 48,500. That was just kind of recently released. So we've seen significant growth. And I think as we've seen that growth, we've seen new amenities, new businesses come into the city that the residents want to see. And in a growing city, there's an increased desire for these types of services. So what City Council has seen and what I think the residents and the business community have seen is that there's a desire to keep that positive momentum going. When you're looking at growing cities, it's almost like if you're not growing, you're almost moving backwards.
Right.
So when we're talking about keeping Brandon competitive and keeping businesses and jobs and that type of thing is to keep on building that positive momentum. So when we're talking about bringing forward development charges and looking at methods of growing the city, it's really about working with the community to accommodate these new growth areas. So the new growth areas are areas that have been identified by different planning rules and regulations, but as a general rule, it looks out to 30 years. So it says, envision Brandon in 30 years. What does it look like? What areas are developed? Where are people living? Where are people shopping and doing business? So what this is about is taking those areas and saying, understanding we're going to have new residents and new places to do business and new places where we're going to work. Where are those located? And we've identified where we think those are located, and that will always change, but at least we have some sort of snapshot right now. And then it's talking about what needs to be done to allow those areas to grow. And that's why we're having this conversation about how we need to grow the city.
And I think that's where so the planners have taken forward documents to City Council. They've been adopted as official plans for our community, and that's where those areas to grow are identified. But then it flips over to the engineering department, and they have to look at the fact that, well, we're only going to grow these areas if we actually have the infrastructure services. So you've done a ton of work, Patrick.
Right. So
working on that.
Right. Kind of in continuation, Ryan and his group has identified kind of the growth nodes in the city. Now the big question becomes, how do we service those growth areas? So we're talking about water, we're talking about sewer, we're talking about storm drains, roads, and drainage as well. And so all of these amenities have to be serviced, and so the work we've done is through our modelers and through kind of work within our engineering section is identify what we have to put in the ground and what roads we have to build to service these areas. So we take that, we identify the sizes, we then cost those out, and then those costs are then attributed to development charges. So it's really looking in not only at the 1-2 years, but all the way out to 30 years. So the other part we also look at is our treatment facilities. When we upgrade a water treatment facility, we always allow for a bit of growth within the city. So that again is a cost that's attributed to growth. So all those costs come together to kind of then form the basis for the development charge.
So I just and these two pieces of the equation kind of jump into the fact, well, how much does all that growth cost the city, or what's the ticket on allowing us to grow? So what does get confusing sometimes is most of the work that we do on infrastructure now, that you see and that we pay for with our taxes, that you see the city council debate when they do their annual budgets. That's looking after our existing city, our existing infrastructure, fixing the streets, renewing our water mains, fixing drainage problems. That's a big ticket, and that's what we're planning and paying for day to day now. When Patrick worked out all the math, the actual cost of allowing all the land that Ryan's group has designated ended up to be like $230 million, like a lot of money, a big ticket. About half of that we think we can find from grants, from other levels of government, but it still takes the number down to, I think I've got here, about $112 million. So it's $112 million. If we were just to put that on taxes over the next 30 years, it's a large tax increase. It would be an over 8% tax increase. Well, we don't think that's reasonable for taxes to pay for all of that. Now, having said that, the other ways we have to pay for that infrastructure are contributions from the new development itself. Right now, developers pay some to help offset the tax burden, but it's not consistent and across the city, and it's a little bit different in every case. So what other municipalities do is they use the development charges, and that's where this word's coming up. So what's happened in this work we're doing right now is we've kind of split that $111 million, and we said, well, what if half of it could be in the form of development charges, and the other half could be, we'll find other ways as a city to contribute to the other half. So what council will be talking about, and we continue to put on the cityofbrandon.ca website, is information about all calculations about a development charges, and then what portion we're going to have to put in as taxpayers also to help Brandon grow.
I just wanted to add to that, though, and you've made an important distinction, is that the difference between the infrastructure that we're talking about and the infrastructure we do on a year-to-year basis, renewals, replacement, upgrades, is one is attributed to growth, the other one is just replacement of an existing asset or pieces of infrastructure. So for the common resident, if you own a home in town, you've got the water main, and after 30 years that water main needs to be replaced, that cost is covered within the taxes or within the utility. It's not a growth-related cost. As opposed to we got development in the southwest of Brandon, I have to put in a new water main to service that growth. That is a cost strictly attributed to that growth. It doesn't benefit existing taxpayers, and as such, do they bore the cost of that or part of that cost? So,
right. Okay, so I want to just back up to something you mentioned, Jackie, and that was that people who own homes, that this isn't going to, organize my thoughts a little bit, because it is a big topic and I want to make sure it gets out right. Other communities, do they have the same plan that Brandon has made as far as the development charge? How many communities actually use this development charge?
Most municipalities do already use the development charge. We'll be one of sort of the last in on doing this in Brandon.
Is there a reason for that?
I think that I don't know if there's a reason for that. If it hasn't been done early on, like a long time ago,
right,
sometimes it's hard to introduce because it's a new idea, and I guess change is different. But I'm going to let Ryan has done a ton of research across Western Canada, and so maybe do you want to speak to some of the other focus on small cities that are doing it?
Sure.
Yeah. So it kind of, your first question about kind of why wasn't it in Brandon? I mean, there's a few reasons, but maybe the one reason is there wasn't a ton of growth in Brandon. So when you're not feeling a lot of pressure to grow, like that's kind of I talked about a few years ago, Brandon was a very consistent city. In fact, we didn't see a lot of growth at all. It wasn't until we saw kind of some of these big industries come into town, like Maple Leaf, where we saw this exponential growth. So when a city is not growing all that much, there's not a huge pressure to figure out, how do we tackle this new infrastructure burden
Right.
because we just don't really have it because we don't see it.
You don't see that cost coming that needs to be balanced.
Exactly. So now that we've gone through, like I'd say, 10 years of fairly good, steady growth, we've started to recognize that, wow, this is costing some money and there's some pipes that need to be put in the ground. And we've reached a point now where, you know, we're kind of on that next threshold to say, like, where do we go from here? And there's some decisions that need to be made. So when we're looking at other municipalities that have gone through kind of similar growth thresholds, like Jackie was saying, very common tool. In Saskatchewan, for example, Weyburn, Saskatchewan, Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, Yorkton, Saskatchewan. So I would say fairly, you know, small prairie cities have adopted this kind of framework of planning. And the idea is that growth pays for itself. Is that in terms of creating a tax base that's sustainable, the idea is that the existing residents should be no worse off in a growing city. So the idea is that when new growth comes in, there's fees collected from new growth that can contribute to this new infrastructure that's needed to service those growth areas. And some municipalities have very complex charge systems. What we're trying to propose right now is a fairly simple system that fits the city of Brandon and kind of this incremental first step into looking at paying for new infrastructure.
Okay, so really we're looking at you say about half of the cost will go to government grants and things like that. You think that can knock it down to about 50%, right? And then after that, about a quarter or 50% of that will be going to the onus of the builder or the company coming in?
Yes, so right now we've spent the last several months talking to a lot of the public and the industry, the developers, the builders, real estate, you know, the folks in the community who are actually in this industry, and trying to fine tune, okay, how should we pay for this growth?
Right.
So what we're coming to is a proposal that we are ready to put in front of council for their consideration, where, yeah, we're kind of splitting that. There was definitely, we got some push that like it should be 100% growth should pay for everything growth related, and we got a lot of push that no, growth benefits all of us, so we should all pitch in to pay for growth.
Share the
so
cost.
At the end of this, and it was a bit of a coincidence that it kind of ended up being a balance. Like half of it could be development charges, and about half of it could be on other ways that we can find to raise money as a community, whether property taxes or increase utility rates and that sort of thing. So it's about half and half is what the proposal going to council would be.
Right. I hear in there just two questions that I also want to break off. One is going to be for one, and one is for you, Jackie. So we'll keep with Jackie. Actually, we're going to switch back to Ryan because I'll forget this one.
Yeah.
With the cost, the added cost that's going to go into the infrastructure coming into Brandon, in all of the research through Yorkton and Weyburn and Prince Albert and all the other communities that you looked at, did this ever make businesses hesitate coming in, this added cost? Did they ever look at it and say, oh, we don't want to pay this extra cost, we're not going to come to Brandon? Did that ever come up in your planning?
Yeah, I don't think Brandon's unique from any other municipality that I've researched. What makes Brandon a little bit unique is we're a little bit behind because this is a new thing for Brandon, but a lot of these other places, it's not a new tool. It's been adopted for many, many years. But just like any increase in cost, like an input when you're running your spreadsheet to doing your business, and your cost on this side of the ledger is going up, for sure there's going to be some concerns. And I think we have to be understanding of that because it's something new. But when they've looked at kind of the impact of a charge, we haven't, or at least I haven't found any correlation between reduced business activity or reduced investment in housing, that type of thing, in a community that's related to a development charge. Generally, communities are desirable and they grow for other reasons. It's not like you have a low development charge, I'm going to go build in your community. It's that you have a vibrant city that I want to live in. You have businesses and jobs, and that's going to push. And then you kind of look secondary at some of these other factors, such as a development charge cost.
Right. And this development charge, this wouldn't be for any businesses that already exist in Brandon. If they were to upgrade or need some sort of an upgrade, would they get the same development charge, or is it just for brand new areas of Brandon that are being expanded into?
Yeah, so That's a very good question, and it gets a little bit tricky because we're looking at a few different options for City Council.
Right.
But the one option that is being considered by Council is for a commercial perspective, let's say, is a square foot charge. So in the city of Brandon, we've defined two separate areas. There's a existing area, and that's the area that's been in existence for many, many years, some of them 100 years. Roads, blocks, businesses, those types of things. And the charge, at least a portion of the charge, would not apply to that area because that's not the area that needs the infrastructure. The infrastructure that's being proposed is to service, like Jackie was talking about, is these areas on the edge of the city.
So the new ones.
Exactly.
So for all intents and purposes, these pre-existing businesses are going to be almost grandfathered in, so they don't have this development charge if they were to expand. For example, the new fire hall that was built, if that were to be going up with this development charge, would they get that development charge? Because obviously new systems would need to go in for a business like that or an infrastructure like that. So would that be pre-existing?
Well, it's not so much grandfathered, but what we'll do, so we've split the city in sort of established areas and
Right.
then emerging areas.
Okay.
So in the established areas that already have all of the infrastructure in place, if a business or a homeowner or anybody goes in and does something that requires an upgrade, we're going to treat that area just exactly the same as it is right now. So if they have to go in and replace the water main, well then, yeah, they're going to work with Patrick and figure out what the cost of, and we would enter into an agreement to get those costs recovered or share those costs in a way that we do right now. So it would be kind of status quo, not so much grandfathered.
Okay.
The new areas, that's where the difference would be, that it would be less ad hoc and more consistent for everyone who wants to develop in the emerging parts of Brandon.
Okay. I'm sorry, that ended up being more than one question. So I'll switch to Jackie for that second part question. This is just in the planning stage, right? You had mentioned that it hasn't yet gone to council. It's en route there, that's heading in that direction. So this isn't something that is set in stone. This isn't happening. Brandon does not for sure have a development charge, correct?
That's correct.
So what is the next step for this development charge? Is it City Council?
Yeah, the next step is City Council. So we're going to get a report together in the next couple of weeks so that Council could consider to see a full final report and a recommendation and a draft and a bylaw, which we would call for first reading. That just gets it on the agenda is what that means.
Right.
And we would look for Council to consider that in the middle of May. After that, we want to get a little more feedback on the details of the exact proposal, and then Council at some point in the next couple of months perhaps would consider having a hearing to talk about it publicly, and then consider whether or not they want to finally adopt that bylaw. They call it giving second and third reading to the bylaw. So that's what the next steps are.
Perfect, good to know. So anything else that really goes into this development charge that you want to make sure Brandon is fully educated about? I know, knowing the City of Brandon, my conversations with Patrick, I'm sure everything is on the Brandon City website. Correct. Because everything is pretty good at being posted on there, very good. So what else do you want to make sure that Brandon is educated on?
One other part of this particular proposal for Brandon that's unique is that we're only talking about water, sewer, land drainage, and transportation. Most of the other communities that we would have looked at, they consider other services, parks and fire halls and police stations. We're not including that, so it's very basic. It's very basic and very a simplified version of the development charge. I think that's one thing that's we get asked about. The other big question that comes up a lot is why don't the taxes of the new development pay for the what they're going to pay a lot of taxes, and we know the new homes pay more taxes than existing homes.
Right.
So why doesn't that cover the charge? Why do we need to have a development charge on top of that? But the fact is that our taxes pay to run the city for the services that we need to service those homes. So whether that's, we do have to also realize that as soon as we grow Brandon, we increase the need for the police service, the fire service, we increase the need for the parks, the maintenance, the snow, the snow removal, snowplow routes,
right.
All of those things get increased as well. So that our taxes are really mostly paying for our existing city.
Right.
And I don't know if you want to comment on that, Patrick, anymore.
No,
about that?
I think you've pretty well covered it. I mean, any of the tax component, any of your rates really are for infrastructure renewal and maintenance and all those other services that Jackie has mentioned. So what we're talking about is new infrastructure here where it doesn't exist. So
Right.
certainly, I mean, the cost that we're talking about, you know, we've looked at what would the tax rate have to be in order to accommodate that. We're talking about a large increase, and it's just not sustainable to have that large increase in a city our size. So, I mean, these are the options that we're looking at in order to try and accommodate these costs. So,
If the city grows, the cost grows. And if the cost
Right.
grows, then everybody needs to take on the responsibility of growth. That's pretty much the conversation we're going for here, right?
Yeah, and how do we share that in a fair way?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Well, thank you for joining me in studio today, Jackie, Ryan, and Patrick. It was great hearing about all the plans we have for Brandon to see it grow. It's very exciting, especially as a young person in Brandon, to see new businesses coming in is always, you know, a great addition to my city. Very proud to live here, and I love it. And I love seeing the amount of work and dedication that City Council is actually putting in to making sure Brandon is always growing and changing and bettering itself. So thank you for all your hard work.
Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Brandon, thanks for joining us today here in studio. My name is Randi Curry. I was joined with Jackie, Ryan, and Patrick from the city of Brandon. That's what's happening in Brandon.